everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of J.S. Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Dir, Jehova will ich singen, which translates to Jehovah, let me now adore thee. Fairly straightforward chorale, one of the longer chorales we've looked at in the recent videos, at least in the last couple of weeks, but for all intents and purposes, very straightforward. We're just going to hop right into the analysis. So 2 flats in the key signature. We're in 3/4 time. We start on B flat. We end on B flat. So I reckon the overall tonality of this chorale is B flat, and we stay in B flat for pretty much the entire chorale. We get one phrase ending here in the key of C minor, but we're in B flat for more than 75% of this chorale. So like I just mentioned, we start on our tonic triad, and then we move to D, B flat, F, and B flat, which is just taking our tonic triad and putting it in first inversion. We then have C, F, B flat, and D. And I look at this F, B flat, and D as sort of a continuation of the B flat recycling or rotating that's happening in the 3 upper voices here, but with the C being static in the bass, I think we're looking towards what's happening on the end of the beat for our harmonic content. C, E flat, A, and C is A diminished over C, that's 7/6, and typically when we see a 1/6 to 7/6 progression, we know it's going to be on the other side, and that's a tonic triad in root position, B flat, F, B flat, and D. And that is in fact the case. This is a very common progression in Bach, both this direction and the other direction. And it really is less to do with 1 and 7 and more so to do with the formula of taking a chord and having it inverted on either side. So one inversion or root position on one side and then a progressed inversion on the other side. And the pivot chord, or the chord that passes the passing chord between the two of them, is a chord that is a step below an inversed inversion. So in this case, 1, 7, 6, 1, you could see 3, 2, 6, 3, for example, or 3, 6, 2, 6, 3. It's that same sort of pattern. But 1, 7, 6, 1, very common pattern in Bach specifically. This B flat's a chord tone, so we don't need to mark it. E flat, B flat, and G is our 4 chord, E flat major. G, B flat, G, and E flat is just taking our 4 chord and putting it in first inversion, so no need to reiterate the Roman numeral. Neighbor tones in the lower voices, G, B flat, G, and E flat. Again, we don't need to reiterate. And this E flat is a chord tone, we don't need to mark it. And this C is a passing tone, and I think you could make an argument that there is a passing C minor chord here, but I don't really think that that's the case. I feel like this is functioning more just like a passing tone, and we're just continuing the idea of E flat into the next measure, which consists of B flat, D, F, and F, which is our tonic triad, B flat major root position. Passing 7th in the bass, G, D, G, and B flat, that's our 6 chord, G minor, passing tone in the alto, E, G, B flat, and E flat. That is E flat major again, which is a 4 chord. Kind of an interesting chord, the C after a 6 especially, but we are seeing a bit of a third space progression, 1, 6, 4, where all of the roots are a third apart, and we do see this from time to time. It's just another way to get to a predominant that'll eventually get to a dominant, typically speaking. But yeah, when roots are a third apart, it is a relatively unusual progression. We're used to seeing chords that have a root that are either a 5th apart or that are adjacent to the chord that precede it. And when we see thirds, they're among the lesser common progressions we see in Bach. Not unprecedented by any means, but just objectively speaking, less common. And then we get F major, F, F, B flat, and C. Of course, F major is being implied, but this B flat is a 4/3 suspension over the bass. This E flat here is a delayed passing 7th, and of course we cadence, perfect authentic cadence in the key of B flat, D, F, and B flat, tonic triad here, root position. Okay, so going into the second measure, we have a half cadence here in the key of B flat. We do have a little bit of tonicization going on with this secondary leading tone here, but all in all, it sounds more like a half cadence to me. The 5th of the chord is in the melody, and we're just seeing E natural as a substitute for 2. We start the phrase off with A, C, F, and C. That's our 5-chord, F major in first inversion, neighbor tones in the lower voices, A, C, F, and E flat this time. We've seen this configuration earlier as well, where we just see the neighbor tone and then the chord repeated. Of course, this time with the E flat, it's taking our chord and turning it into a 7 chord, but still in the same inversion, first inversion. So that would be a 6-5 chord. This F is a chord tone, this A is a chord tone, so we don't need to mark them. And then we have B flat, F, and D, which is our tonic triad in root position with this late passing tone in the alto. F, C, A, and C is a 5 chord, F major. E flat, F, B flat, and D kind of harkens back to what we saw here. I think this B flat and this D are accented non-chord tones, and really what we're looking at is the end of the beat. E flat, F, A, and C spells another 5-7 chord. This time it is in third inversion, F7 over E flat, and that resolves where we would expect D, F, B flat, and D, which is our tonic triad in first inversion. The root is a fifth away, and it's in first inversion because that's where the chordal seventh is resolving. This B flat's also a chord tone, so we don't need to mark it. Very similar to the first phrase here. We then have C, C, E flat, and A. That's A minor, sorry, I was about to say A minor flat 5, which I guess is accurate, but it's more specifically it's an A diminished triad in first inversion, so 7-6. And really interestingly, just like we saw earlier, this 1-6-7-6-1 progression, which is by far the most common, the chord after this 7-6 chord in this configuration is pretty much always going to be a 1 chord. Bach reverses course and goes right back to 1-6 rather than going to 1. A little bit of a quirky detail. D, B flat, F, and B flat. So same inversion is kept, but we're still seeing the same 1-7-1 progression. We have neighbor tones here in the alto and the bass before we get D, F, F, and B flat. That's another tonic triad in first inversion, and then we're going to move to B flat, which is a chord tone, G, which is not a chord tone, E natural, which is not a chord tone, and the C, which is an anticipation, which gives us C7 over B flat. That would be 5-4-2, a 5, secondary dominant, and then get this, the 5-4-2 chord does not resolve where we would expect, which would be a first inversion F major chord, but rather a root position F major chord. Very unusual. This is, of course, taken with a grain of salt because it's on the end of the beat. It's not like a 4-2 chord going to another chord where there's no passing tones or any counterpoint going on, but we do just see this very abrupt leap from B flat down to F. So kind of unusual in that regard, definitely something worth pointing out because for pretty much all intents and purposes, 4-2 chords are pretty consistent in terms of how they resolve. Moving into the B section, we get the only other visitation of another key in the entire chorale. We end with an imperfect authentic cadence in the key of C minor, but we start off in the key of B flat. F, C, F, and A is a 5 chord, F major again, so we don't need to reanalyze what's going on here. Passing 7th in the bass, and then we have D, F, F, and B flat, which is our tonic triad in first inversion. We then move to E flat, A, F, and C, another 4-2 chord, a 5-4-2, and we would expect this to resolve to 1-6, but we actually, if we look at like the big picture, we're resolving to a tonic triad in root position, but there is something to mention here. We have C, D, F, and D. Of course, this C is an accented non-chord tone, and it's this B flat that's our chord tone here. This is a B flat triad in root position, and notice how the bass still resolves down by step, but Bach just continues the figure into the root of the chord. That's all that happens. We've seen this done before by Bach, where he takes a 5-4-2 chord, and in the big picture, like I said, he does technically resolve to a 1 chord, but the bass still does resolve down by step. It just is part of a linear figure. So this D is, I guess, technically a passing tone. Now we're looking for a point from this point onward, probably to look for a likely place to modulate, because we're having A flats and B naturals start to occur in this measure. So E flat, B flat, E flat, and G gives me sort of a vibe from like the first phrase here. it was a 4 chord in the key of B flat, and in the key of C minor, we have a 3 chord. I think this is a likely place for it to happen rather than happening on the and of this beat, just because it just feels like it's repeating the same chord with a little less emphasis. Or I guess in a roundabout way, it's just re-emphasizing the chord, but doing so on a metrically weaker position. And then we get this progression from 3 to actually a likely destination, because 3 chords are relatively uncommon. Relatively, we see them frequently because Bach has written a lot of material, but 3 is by far the least common chord that you'll find in the chorales. But 3 does go to 6, A flat, C, E flat, and C, which is A flat major in root position, and following this cycle of falling fifths, which is generally the most likely place a chord will go to. 3 going to 6 follows that normative progression. And we also get some neighbor tones, this time in the upper voices, kind of similar to this figure going on here, where in the lower voices they go down. Here it's happening in the upper voices, where this pair of neighbor tones is maybe implying a harmony, but it's not quite enough context in order to give us a chord to analyze on this beat here. We then go to A flat, C, E flat, and C again, which is another A flat major chord, and then we have 3 notes off of the harmonic rhythm. This C is a chord tone, this G is a passing seventh, and this D is an anticipation as well, just like this C here. We have E flat, C, G, C, E flat, and D. So again, not really an analyzable chord. It's like has some cluster vibes to it, but the 6th chord will eventually resolve to a chord that actually makes sense following the same principle of the cycle of falling fifths: F, C, A flat, and D, which is D minor 7 flat 5 over F, which is 2-6-5. We know that Bach loves 2-6-5 chords in cadential situations especially, and we know where 2-6-5 is likely to go, to a 5 chord, G, B natural, G, and D, with this delayed passing, or sorry, anticipation. It's an anticipation in the melody here, but G major is our dominant in the key of C minor, and of course we've already modulated, we cadence on a C minor chord, C, C, G, and E flat, which is our tonic triad in root position in the key of C minor. Looking ahead to our last phrase, we're going to pretty much immediately revert back to the key of B flat and end our chorale with a perfect authentic cadence in the same key. So E flat, C, G, and C. That's another C minor chord. This time it's in first inversion though, and I do believe this is our pivot back to the key of B flat. It's a 2-6 chord. F, C, F, and A is our 5 chord, F major. 2 going to 5, another cycle of falling fifths progression like we saw earlier. And then we get F, C, G, and F, C, G, and B flat. It's kind of interesting how Bach takes the harmonic rhythm, and I guess he models it after what we just saw in the previous phrase, but this G and this B flat are kind of like accented non-chord tones, very similar to sort of what's happening in the first phrase, so maybe that's what he's going for from a textural standpoint, because we really don't see any chordal variety until beat 3. So this A is a chord tone, but G and B flat are sort of like accented non-chord tones. Like G is like a macro level passing tone at the harmonic rhythmic level. Like it's a passing tone that happens on a beat that could potentially be interpreted as a harmonic rhythm. But then we have E flat, C, A, and G. This G is an accented non-chord tone. I guess you could make the argument that this is a 7-4-3 chord, A minor 7 flat 5 over E flat, but I think it's more likely that this is a 5-4-2 chord. So we can just change the figure base to say that the root is the same, but the structure is different. The reason why I say this is because 5 going to 7, not really the strongest progression, not a progression we see very often in Bach without a little bit of, a couple grains of salt. And 5 and 7, very similar in terms of function and pitch content. So, 6 of one, half dozen of another. If you feel like a 7 chord is happening here because you're more of a literalist, that's totally fine. For me, I'm trying to look at the bigger picture here. And then we have afterwards, and part of what strengthens my argument about this being a 4-2 chord is a tonic triad in first inversion, D, D, B flat, and F, which is where we would expect a 5-4-2 chord to resolve. Then we have G, D, B flat, and F. Now again, I'm really looking at the and of the beat here. I think this could be a 6-7 chord, G minor in root position, or G minor 7 more specifically, but I feel like this G is overshadowed by the fact that off of the harmonic rhythm we just have F, D, B flat, and B flat, which just looks to me like another tonic triad. We could interpret this as a 6-4 chord, just continuing the idea of B flat into the next measure. We then have E flat, B flat, and G, which is a 4 chord, E flat major in root position with a neighbor tone, a neighboring 7th in the bass. E flat, B flat, and G just continues that same idea, kind of similar to the first phrase. Perhaps Bach is kind of coming full circle from a harmonic perspective and how it impacts the form. That's just speculation though, it's definitely not verified. But this F is a passing tone. We then get F, F, B flat, and E flat. It's most likely this E flat's kind of functioning like a 4 or like a 7-6 suspension over the bass, and what we're really getting is 1-6-4 here, B flat major over F, and we know where a 1-6-4 chord is likely to go in this cadential situation, to 5, F, E flat, A, and C, which is not just a 5 chord, but a 5-7 chord, F7 in root position. And then we have 2 anticipations, one in the melody and one in the tenor. I'll go ahead and add this bracket too because I'm used to seeing it. And then we cadence on B flat major, B flat, D, F, and B flat, which is our tonic triad in root position. Other than that, I think that's pretty much everything that I have to mention about this chorale. Really, I think the only things to write home about, or maybe only thing, is this interesting 5-4-2 resolution. It is happening off of the harmonic rhythm, but Bach has been known to take his cadences and subdivide the rhythm, so the fact that this is already a very harmonically active measure proportionately to the rest of the chorale makes me feel like this is just an anomaly, and it is interesting to see a 4-2 chord resolve this way. It's resolving in the way that we see this 4-2 chord resolving, but without the passing tones. So Bach just skips the the conventional resolution and just goes straight to a 5 chord, which is really fascinating. But all in all, I think that's really the only I guess quirky hallmark maker's mark part of this chorale that makes it memorable for me, because other than that the harmony is relatively straightforward and there isn't too much to comment on other than that. So I think I'm just going to cap the video off on that thought. If you are interested in following me along on the journey to analyze all of Bach's chorale harmonizations, feel free to subscribe to the channel. You can hit the notification icon as well, and like the video if you enjoyed the content. Thank you so much for watching the video and supporting the channel by doing so. I look forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.